Yellowstone's rivers were unraveling, forests thinning, and by 1995, just one beaver colony clung to life while elk numbers soared to nearly 19,000. 14 wolves would change everything. They restored balance in ways no one predicted. But how could a handful of predators trigger a recovery so profound it stunned the world's scientists? The answer begins with a decision made decades earlier. In 1926, the last wolf in Yellowstone was killed under orders from federal predator control programs. For decades, government trappers and hunters swept the park with rifles and poison, determined to remove every last wolf. Ranchers and local communities cheered their disappearance, convinced that fewer predators meant more livestock and game. Wolves were labeled as vermin, a threat to progress and prosperity. The campaign was systematic, backed by official policy and public support. No one considered the consequences for the land itself. With wolves gone, the park's natural balance was broken. The absence of this top predator removed a force that had quietly shaped the ecosystem for thousands of years. Elk, once wary and kept in check, lost their only natural enemy. Their numbers began to climb, but the warning signs went unnoticed. In the eyes of policymakers, the mission was accomplished. Yellowstone was now a park without wolves. It was seen as a triumph of human management, or so it seemed. The true cost of this decision would not become clear for generations, as the landscape began a slow and silent unraveling. Elk multiplied quickly, filling Yellowstone's valleys and hillsides. By the early 1990s, their population on the northern range reached nearly 19,000, more than 4 times historic estimates. With no predators to fear, elk browsed day and night, stripping young aspens, willows, and cottonwoods from riverbanks. Saplings never grew tall enough to anchor the soil. The lush forests that once lined the streams vanished, leaving bare, exposed banks vulnerable to every spring flood. The rivers responded. Without roots to hold them, banks slumped and collapsed. Channels widened and split into braids, cutting through what had once been stable ground. Streams ran shallow and fast, carrying away more earth with every storm. What had been a network of meandering, shaded creeks became a landscape of eroding banks and sun-baked gravel. Beavers, once common throughout Yellowstone, faced a crisis. Their survival depends on willows and aspens for both food and building material. As elk devoured the last shoots, beaver colonies disappeared. By 1995, only a single beaver colony remained in the entire park, a stark reminder of how far the ecosystem had unraveled. Wetlands dried up, ponds vanished. Waterfowl, otters, and amphibians lost their homes. Decades of unchecked grazing had set off a chain reaction, stripping life from the rivers and silencing the wetlands. The park's natural engineers were gone, and with them, the pulse of water and life that once defined Yellowstone's valleys. On a bitter January 1995 morning, a convoy of trucks rolled into Yellowstone's Lamar Valley, each carrying a heavy steel crate. Inside, 14 gray wolves from Alberta, Canada, waited in uneasy silence. Years of debate and legal battles led to this moment. Ranchers and hunters had fought the plan, fearing for their herds and hunting grounds. Politicians argued in Congress, and the nation watched as the fate of the park hung in the balance. But biologists and conservationists pressed on, convinced that Yellowstone needed its lost predator. Molly Beatty, the first woman to lead the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, walked to the first crate. She reached in and with quiet determination carried the alpha female, number 5, into the acclimation pen. For weeks, the wolves remained in these enclosures, learning the scents and sounds of their new home. This slow-release method gave them a chance to adapt, to shed their fear of confinement, and to begin life as wild wolves once again. 14. Wolves, chosen for their genetic diversity and calm around humans, now stood at the threshold of a park that had not heard their howls in 70 years. The risk was enormous, but the hope was even greater. Wolves are social animals, and within months the newcomers began sorting themselves into packs. 17 more wolves arrived from British Columbia in 1996, doubling the population and setting the stage for complex alliances and rivalries. Each pack carved out its own territory. Some roamed the open valleys, others claimed the dense forests. The Druid Peak pack quickly became the most studied and in many ways the most storied. At its center was Wolf 21M, a large black-coated male whose behavior stood out even among seasoned observers. Unlike the ruthless reputation that often follows wolves, 21M was known for his restraint. In territorial clashes, he spared defeated rivals, allowing them to retreat instead of finishing them off. Researchers watched as he mourned the loss of packmates, lingering near their remains and refusing to leave. His leadership style earned him the nickname the Gentleman Wolf. Under his guidance, the Druid Peak pack thrived, raising pups and defending their range with discipline rather than aggression. These early years revealed that wolves are more than predators. Their lives are shaped by loyalty, grief, and the subtle rules of family. The bonds inside each pack would soon ripple outward, shaping not just wolf society, but the entire landscape around them. Wolves brought more than teeth to Yellowstone. They brought a new kind of order. Elk, once fearless, began to avoid open riverbanks and tangled willow thickets, wary of ambush. Scientists called it the ecology of fear. For the first time in decades, young willows and aspens had a chance to grow. In some valleys, the volume of riparian vegetation soared by more than 1,500% within just a few years. The change was visible not just in the plants, but in the shape of the land itself. Tree roots gripped the soil, halting the relentless collapse of riverbanks. Channels that had sprawled wide and shallow began to narrow and deepen. Meanders returned, and pools formed where only gravel had remained. The rivers, once battered and unstable, now flowed with a steadier, more natural rhythm. Into this recovering landscape came the beavers. With willows thickening along the water's edge, the park's natural engineers set to work. From a single surviving colony in 1995, beaver numbers exploded to 121 colonies by 2024. Their dams spread water across the floodplain, creating new ponds and wetlands. Each dam slowed the current, filtered sediment, and raised the water table. Fish, birds, and otters followed, drawn to the mosaic of habitats beavers built. What began as a change in elk behavior rippled outward, transforming vegetation, reshaping rivers, and giving life back to the valley's architects. Scientists who had watched the park unravel now witnessed its revival, one link at a time. Wolf reintroduction changed not only the land, but the fortunes of the people living at Yellowstone's edge. In towns like Gardner, Montana, wolf watching became a draw for visitors from around the globe. Annual tourism revenue tied to the presence of wolves now reaches as high as $82 million, supporting local businesses and jobs that did not exist before. The economic payoff silenced many early critics who once feared wolves would only bring trouble. Inside the park, careful monitoring continues. The Yellowstone Wolf Project, led for decades by biologist Doug Smith, tracks every pack, every birth, every loss. As of late 2024, the population holds steady between 100 and 120 wolves across 9 packs, a number that reflects both resilience and the limits of the ecosystem. Researchers now understand that wolves acted as a catalyst, not a cure-all. Recent studies, including a 2025 synthesis, reveal that drought cycles, bison grazing, and shifts in river hydrology also shape the park's recovery. The story is not as simple as wolves alone saving Yellowstone, but the evidence is clear. Their return set in motion changes no single human project could have engineered. The lessons from these hills now ripple outward, studied by scientists and land managers around the world. Today, Yellowstone's rivers run clearer, and beaver colonies multiply because a missing predator returned. As nations now look to restore lost species, Yellowstone proves nature's resilience is not theoretical. When we restore what we erased, entire landscapes can heal. Sometimes letting nature lead is the boldest act of all.